Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. According to my clock here, it is 6 o'clock. So thank you for joining me. I'm sorry about kind of the late notice, but I'm trying to get up to speed as quickly as I can with this particular course. So again, welcome. Many of you are familiar faces to me, but for those of you that I've not had in class before, my name is Tracy Johnson. And as I'm sure you're aware, hang on. Okay, just making sure. Sometimes people text me during the meetings to see if they can't get in or whatever. So anyway, my name is Tracy Johnson, and I am the sole teacher now of ED 720. So welcome. If you're new to using Zoom, if you would, down at the bottom when you scroll across your screen, you'll see a microphone. If you would, just go ahead and mute that. Otherwise, we pick up a lot of background noise that makes it kind of hard for everybody to hear. Okay, we've still got more people joining us too. So we'll let everybody kind of get up to speed. But just real quickly, let's kind of, okay, I'm just kind of sorry, I'm looking here to see who else joined us. So as we kind of wait for everybody to get on board with us tonight, do you guys have any burning questions about assignments or things that I've posted or anything like that? And then we'll leave time at the end, of course, too, for additional questions. Anybody? Okay, well, without further ado then, what I want to do with you guys tonight is to just kind of give you an overview of curriculum and what we're going to be talking about in ED 720. So we're going to talk not only about the history of curriculum, but how it all fits together, as well as how perceptions of individuals, both students, faculty, and parents, can impact curriculum, and what it means to put together a curriculum that is going to be effective. So if you haven't seen Kale on the screen with his absolutely adorable like baby boy there, be sure and wave at him. He's tall. And apparently it's going to be taking a graduate class with us tonight. So welcome, Kale. And I see your beautiful daughter now behind you too. Okay, so let's start off first by talking about the history of curriculum. So this is in your PowerPoint that I sent to you guys, but I'm not going to go through and read all of it. But when we think about curriculum and what it means, remember, curriculum actually started back in ancient times with the Greek and Roman philosophers. The ones that are most noted for talking about curriculum and education include Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, etc. But at the time, not everyone was being educated, just the upper class, mostly males, were being a part of the education system. So when Aristotle and Plato began talking about what it means to be educated, etc., they started putting forth sort of these universal truths or ideas. So a lot of people say that is when the first idea of a nationalized curriculum actually began. So it's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and we have just tried to evolve and grow with it as it has changed. The curriculum that was based on the philosophies of these very well-known thinkers back in ancient times stayed in place for literally almost 1,000 years. It wasn't until we got into the Middle Ages that the curriculum began to evolve and change. So starting in the Middle Ages, the Catholic churches became the primary educational institutions for, again, young men. We weren't educating women or girls at that time. But it was a very Christian, Catholic-based model. So then you move on from there. Also around the same times, we had the world evolving both in Islamic countries as well as in China, etc. And these were all, again, curriculums that were based on a combination of religious beliefs as well as philosophies of the great thinkers for each one of those regions. So let's fast forward to how this all began really for the United States. So in 1896, the Federal Department of Education was created. So I didn't realize it was that old. I thought it was a much more recent development, but it actually was created back in the late 1800s. And education at that time was based on John Dewey's model, which had a very agrarian foundation. So the length of the school year, the days people went to school, et cetera, was based on a farm type culture. And also it was really, I guess, reinforced by a Supreme Court decision at the time, where the Supreme Court said that, you know, separate schools, or segregated schools as we would call them, are actually considered equal. Then in 1939, the WISC, or the Wessler Adult Intelligence Scale, was developed, and that also became a driving force in how curriculum was used and created and thought about in our schools. So the idea of intelligence being something that would drive curriculum and teaching became very, very important. Then if you move on into 1953, those of us who remember B.F. Skinner and studying him maybe back in our younger days, it was all about reinforcement theory, and that basically children were trainable much like an animal would be by using a reinforcement sort of theory. Then in the mid-1950s, we had a substantial change in education with the Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court decision that decided that separate schools were inherently unequal. So the idea of separate is not equal became another driving force. And so you began to see, as an outgrowth of that, particularly into the 1960s, the idea of multicultural curriculum, or curriculum that was somewhat more reflective of the differences in our population and amongst our students. In the 1970s, we saw really the introduction of Piaget and his ideas around the stages of learning. So, you know, particularly if you're an early childhood educator, you may know a lot about Piaget's stages of development and how that impacts learning. Then in 1972, IDEA, which is still around today, became part of the law. And that addressed that we needed to educate not only our students who came from a more traditional kind of background, but our students with differences or disabilities deserved that same kind of education. So you'll see how this evolution has changed. We went from ancient times where it was only basically white males receiving education, and that continued through the Middle Ages, where the same groups of individuals were being educated and given a faith-based type curriculum. And it really isn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that we began to see education expand to include more groups. That included females, as well as students with disabilities and students of all races and colors. Then in 1973, Bloom's taxonomy was published, as well as the Rehabilitation Act, or for those of us with a special ed background, Public Law 94-142 became a very important piece. Then in 1991, we expanded the idea of educating and providing curricula for students with disabilities to include the Section 504 students. So these are students who may not have the same kind of disability as those that were traditionally served under special education, but had something that was preventing them from learning. And another element of curriculum that, you know, quite honestly, I don't think a lot of people have thought about and how it impacted education was in 1994 when they had the Columbine shooting. This had a dramatic impact on education. I know as an educational leader, you know, I was a principal at that time, and it really did change how we educated our students and how we thought about curriculum. So the more social, emotional side became very important to the creation of curriculum and the delivery of instruction. Previously, it had really been much more academic in nature. Then we're all familiar with No Child Left Behind that came on board in 2001. And then in 2007, the first Smart Board was introduced. And so with that being done, it changed the delivery systems of curriculum. 2009, Common Core came in. And then, you know, we began to see some, I wouldn't say lessening, but some change in terms of how states were reacting to federal law. And there began to be sort of this pushback away from the nationalized idea of Common Core and back to state rights. So if you think about it, we've had this pendulum sort of swing here in the United States where it was a state-driven process, then it moved to a very local process. Then we had the integration of federal mandates, Supreme Court decisions, new laws, and then the more that was proliferated, again, we have this pushback now that we're still experiencing today about, is education primarily the responsibility of the federal government or the state and local government? So in 2011, President Obama at the time allowed states to begin to apply for waivers so that they didn't have to follow all of the NCLB things. We've also seen in the last few years this huge proliferation of charter and private schools, as well as alternative schooling options. So now we've found that, just within the last year, homeschool enrollment has skyrocketed. It's the largest it's ever been in our country. In fact, the last statistic I saw was that over 17 million students were actually being educated in a home school type environment. And then in 2018, we continue to see this dramatic increase in online digital education. So, you even see commercials now for like Connections Academy in Texas or some of these other online schools. Online has been around for a bit for college type classes, but now we're seeing it even on down to kindergarten, pre-K through 12th grade. So lots of changes in curriculum and the expectations of it. So I just want to hear from you guys. Do you feel like at this point that you are working in a system or a school that has more of a locally driven, state-driven, or nationally driven curriculum? And if you don't weigh in, I will call shamelessly on those of you that I want to.
This is Donna.
Hey, Donna.
We are more parish driven, I believe. We do have some things from the state, but we are very locally driven.
Okay. Anybody else?
Ours is local too. We have been using the guidebook for Allen Parish, but they are adopting a new curriculum this summer. EL is the name of it. We have no idea what it looks like or how it works, but we're going to start that in June. So, and that's just Allen Parish that's adopting that.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else want to weigh in?
As a private school, it's definitely, our local, we use state standards, but we develop it in our local community.
Okay. That's encouraging, quite honestly, because, you're going to get my personal opinion. I do believe curriculum should be locally driven. I think it's very difficult for us to meet the needs of all students in all schools with a national type curriculum. What you need to know and how you go about learning it in Nebraska is going to be vastly different than what you're going to need in Louisiana or Texas.
Right.
So like I said, I'm encouraged to hear that. I know for me coming from Texas, where I served, my 35 years in public education, they had a statewide type curriculum. The state puts out what they call the texts, which are the standards and objectives and all of that. And then there was an attempt to develop a statewide curriculum. It failed pretty miserably. In fact, there were some lawsuits over it, et cetera. And so they've moved kind of back to the more locally driven curriculum. So now that we know a little bit about the history of curriculum, let's talk about exactly what is a curriculum. So tell me in your own words, guys, how would you define curriculum? There's no right answer either, because pretty much anybody you read is going to give you a different definition. So just jump right in. What is curriculum?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, hey Lisa.
Hey, I think that curriculum is just the pathway that sets up what kids need to learn and how they're going to get there.
Okay, great. I like your definition. Okay, other ideas?
I'll go. Before I took this class, I looked at curriculum as just where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And I feel like as you mentioned earlier, the whole after Columbine social emotional side has been added, and I think that's so important, and things that sometimes lawmakers leave out when they're making decisions, that, you know, we're not just curriculum or standards deliverers. We're more than that in the classroom every day.
Great point, Amy. Thank you for bringing that up, because, you know, unfortunately, you're right. Too often, I think we have the people at central office, for example. I came from a very large system in Dallas. Actually, when I was in the Irving School District in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I was in charge of all secondary teaching and learning. And, you know, the simple thing to do is focus on content. So, you know, it's pretty easy to write out, you know, what are the objectives? What do you want students to learn, let's say, in algebra? What are some activities, et cetera? But a really great curriculum addresses the whole child. So there is a social emotional component. There is a communication component. There are also what, you know, we refer to as the soft skills that we don't typically think about. And those are the things that companies and industry really expect us to teach our students. So that may be things like, how do you collaborate? How do you work with others? How do you resolve conflict? So a true curriculum is, as I'm reading the chat over here too, it's how you're going to go about teaching a course or content, but embedded in that is much more than just traditional learning objectives or standards-based type curriculum. Like I said, effective curriculum really addresses the whole child. So in a nutshell, according to the experts, you know, whoever that may be at this point, a curriculum that's done well tells us what needs to be covered. But most importantly, we have to understand why that needs to be covered or taught, and how we're going to go about doing it. Yeah, somebody else just posted a guide or plan that shapes a student's learning experience. Excellent. That's a really succinct, nice definition. It also addresses the changing landscape. So, for example, if you were to read a curriculum document from, let's say, 2000, which, you know, isn't that long ago, I mean, you know, 18 years, you probably didn't see a lot of technology embedded in it. But if you're going to write a curriculum for 2018 and beyond, technology should be seamless within the curriculum. It shouldn't be separate or apart. It is very much included. You also have to know what competencies or outcomes you're hoping to achieve with your students. It's sort of like going on a trip with no end destination in mind. If you don't have those outcomes or competencies, then, like I said, you're on a road trip with no destination. So very, very important. It also needs to be connected. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, I experienced and have seen, you know, being a preschool, kindergarten teacher, all the way through senior English teacher. I literally taught every grade level in between except 7th and 8th. Thank goodness I'm not a middle school person. But, you know, one of the things that I think is really true and that our curriculums tend to miss out on is the fact that we don't make within the curriculum connections for our kids. So, for example, even a high school, let's say junior, and they're taking biology and geometry. They don't often see how those two subjects are connected, but a curriculum that is well done brings in that interdisciplinary approach so that students can see how geometry is connected to biology, and biology is connected to English and literature, and how that is all connected to history. So students don't necessarily do that on their own, but we have to be able to do that for them. We also need to make sure that we are bringing in and invoking through our curriculum new ideas and thoughts. So, Will, I see you posted 21 years in the middle school. All I can say is God bless you. I am so glad we have people that love middle school kids. But the hormones on feet were just, I was a middle school principal for 3 years, and I felt like I did my time, and then I got to move to high school with, you know, the children that I could actually deal with a little better. So God bless all of you that are middle school people. The other thing that I want to bring out tonight and talk about when we're thinking about how we go about developing curriculum, you have to have a philosophy of what it is you're trying to achieve. So one of the things that I know that we did when we began to, I would say, redevelop the curriculum when I was in Irving was we started with the idea of portrait of a graduate. So what was it that we wanted a student who graduated from our schools to be able to know and to be able to do? And then we used Wiggins and McTighe's backwards design process to back into how we could get students to achieve those things. So when you think that globally, you're not listing at that point discrete skills, like students will be able to factor a polynomial equation. You're not that specific. What you want is you want students to have great numeracy or problem-solving skills or the ability to communicate orally and in writing, etc. Then from there, we went grade by grade. So we started with our graduate, then we said, okay, by the time a student leaves 11th grade, what is it we want them to know and to be able to do? Then we did it for 10th and 9th, all the way down to our pre-K kids. Once we had that sort of global vision, then we were able to begin to set specific goals and aims. I will tell you, I've studied literally hundreds of curriculums over the course of my career. Very few of them start with that big picture in mind of what it is they want kids to be able to accomplish at the end of a particular school year or grade level or content area or whatever. And they don't set those sort of broad philosophical expectations. They also don't set those kind of goals and aims that are really necessary. If you fail to do those two parts, you end up with a curriculum that is nothing more than a listing of discrete objectives and standards. So as you look at the curriculum that's being used in your own schools, I really would encourage you to be somewhat critical when you look at it and see, does it accomplish those big picture goals and aims? Or is it just a discrete listing of skills that we want kids to accomplish? Great curriculum does both. Once you have those sort of generalized goals and aims, then you can become more specific and get into those content or grade level specific objectives. And then you also have to start thinking about in curriculum, how do you want students to demonstrate mastery of those specific things? So that gets into learning activities, etc. Now, there are two schools of thoughts regarding how far curriculum should go. Some people say curriculum should be pretty broad in scope and only somewhat specific in terms of the depth of objectives, etc. Other people say that curriculum should be very, very specific. And I worked in school districts that we were from one extreme to the other. So for example, when I was in Dallas, the original curriculum that we started with, very broad. And quite frankly, I know as a principal, I used to feel badly handing that to a new teacher. I felt like I was saying, oh, here, good luck, figure this out, because all you have is a bunch of objectives. Conversely, I worked with the Richardson School District for a bit, and they had the most prescriptive curriculum I've ever seen. It literally was, day one of kindergarten, here's your objectives, here's your goals, you're going to do these activities, and you're going to accomplish this, and you're going to assess it this way. And it was literally that specific and prescriptive every single day of a child's school year. Personally, I think that the ideal curriculum falls somewhere in the middle. There should be suggested activities, there should be some things that teachers can use, but when you become so prescriptive that you're telling teachers what to do every single day, you're not only squashing teachers' creativity, it's almost impossible to meet the needs of all of your kids. And even, obviously in a Dallas ISD, we had kids from every, 430 some square miles, and our communities were very different. And even in a smaller place like Richardson, the same thing. Kids come to the school with different backgrounds and experiences and different levels of education. So you have to be more, like I said, somewhere in the middle with all of that. The other part that I think that we forget to talk about too is what curriculum should be for parents. We need to get our parents more involved in curriculum development as well as understanding. So we'll talk some more about that later on, and there's some additional information in there as well. The last thing that I want to go to talk to you guys about tonight is really the changing landscape of our students as well as our faculty. So I know that I have seen this firsthand, not only in the public school realm, but also in the collegiate realm as well. As our faculty and teachers are aging and getting older, the students, of course, are not. So there is becoming this sort of huge generational gap between how our kids want to learn and the ways that we are most comfortable teaching. So the other thing too is that there are lots of economic pressures that influence schools, and also we know that technology is absolutely important. So let's talk about, and I want to ask you guys to tell me your ages, but I don't think we have anybody that is in what we would call the GI generation. Those are people that were born between 1900 and 1924. So that would make you 94 years old or older. So I can pretty safely say that we don't have any faculty that fall in that realm. Then we move to the silent generation. That's people that were born between 1925 and 1945. And that makes them 73 to 93 years old. I was a high school principal in 2 different schools, and I had teachers that fell in that generation in both schools. One of my teachers retired with 65 years of experience. In fact, his teacher certification was so old that all it said was that he was certified as a teacher. It didn't say what content, didn't say what grade level, whatever. In fact, when we had to certify everybody as highly qualified for NCLB and we sent that into the district, they called me and they said, "You're making this up." And I said, "I swear to you, that is exactly what his certification says, teacher." Then in my other high school, I had 2 teachers, husband and wife, who retired together after 60 years of service. So, you know, there was sometimes a little bit of a generation gap. However, these were outstanding individuals, and they did a great job. Most of our schools are made up currently of people from the baby boomer or Generation X. So baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964, which makes them 54 to 72 years old currently, or Generation X, which was born from 1965 to 1979, and that puts them between ages of 39 and 53. So you may be wondering, okay, why does all of this matter? Because the more you learn about the generational characteristics that people, you know, were born into, I think the better you'll understand why sometimes curriculum is written or planned in certain ways versus what it is that our students need. I'm not saying that that's an impossible obstacle to overcome, but it can be sometimes a challenge. Then we have our millennials, or Generation Y. They were born between 1980 and 1996, and they are ages 22 to 38. So those are usually our newest staff members. Then we have in our schools right now lots of Generation Z people who were born between 1997 and 2011. They're ages 7 to 21. And then we have our Generation Alpha students, which were born from 2012 on, and those are our less than 7-year-old students. In fact, today this kind of hit home for me when I was thinking about it. My daughter called me, and my 3-year-old granddaughter, Madeline, got on the phone. And she said, "Nana, do you want to hear my idea?" Now, keep in mind, she's 3. And so I'm thinking, okay. I said, "Sure, what's your idea?" And she said, "Well, her older sister, Riley, is going to spend the night tomorrow night with her friend. So my idea is that I'm going to come over and spend the night with you." And I thought, okay. I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And then what really got me and told me there's a huge generational difference, she said, "Do you need me to send you a calendar reminder?" And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, what a different world. You know, I'm the person who, first of all, I won't forget that she's going to come over, but if I need to remember something, I'm more likely to put it on a sticky note and put it on the dash of my car so I don't forget, or, you know, on the back door so I see it right before I leave. And here I have my 3-year-old granddaughter who's wanting to set up a calendar reminder for me using technology. So very different mindset. And for some of us that are a little older, that can be kind of scary. So let's talk about what this all means in terms of our school. So let's start first with our Generation X people, which I think, just kind of guessing is probably a lot of you. So these were our latchkey kids when they were growing up because they were often at home by themselves. Both parents were working. Also, many of our Generation X families came from single-parent homes. They are pretty technology savvy, and then they're just kind of used to this idea of corporate downsizing, layoffs, and fewer career opportunities. So if you were born between 1968 and 1979, these are your characteristics, and it will definitely influence how you approach curriculum development as well as working with your families. Generation X was also, they're very independent and problem solvers. They're ambitious and self-starters. They want to be supportive, but they do not want to be told what to do or especially how to do it. They also like instant gratification and immediate feedback. And they are people who will just keep learning. The other day, we are setting up an interview with a new Master's of Health Administration possible adjunct. And he is definitely a Generation Xer. I was pretty amazed when I read his resume. He is an MD. He's a JD. He has an MHA. He has an MBA. He has all kinds of certifications with all of these acronyms. I don't even know what they mean. But this is a guy who obviously really is into learning. So that's something that we see with our Generation Xers. Now, our Generation Y is going to be those people who are generally our parent population, but also you will still see some faculty that fall in this too. They are from oftentimes divorced single-parent homes, but these are parents who are very, very hands-on. So we call them oftentimes our helicopter parents. I know you guys have never seen them. But they're oftentimes overindulged, overprotected, and self-absorbed, but they're also very technology savvy. Today I got a call from a Generation Y parent who wanted to talk to me about her child's grade in class, and I had to remind her that her child was certainly over the age of 18 because they're in a graduate program, and then I could not talk to her about her child's grades. She was quite angry and incensed because even though her child, and I actually looked up the student's age just because I wanted to know, her 32-year-old daughter, she just felt it was very important to be that involved in her, like I said, a 32-year-old's life. So it was none of y'all. It was actually in a different program. But our Generation Y group is very different than maybe what we're used to. This is also a generation that's very self-confident. They're entitled. They're ambitious with high expectations. They want to know process and rules because they want to be able to get ahead. They also are the ones who expect to start at the top. They want constant and immediate feedback. And they're not nearly as independent as our Gen Xers. Yeah, I agree, Will. Helicopter parents, probably part of the reason I decided to retire, quite frankly. I happen to be the stepmother to a Generation Y person, and she and I often have challenging conversations because she wants to, things like, I don't know how to file my income taxes, so you need to do it for me. And my general response is, no, I'm not going to file your income taxes. You're a 24-year-old adult. You can figure it out yourself. But those are the kinds of things that happen with our Generation Y parents. Certainly a big challenge for us in education. Let's talk now about our Generation Z. These are the students that we primarily have in our schools right now. They tend to be cynical, even at a young age. Which you may or may not have seen. They're also very private, but they are also very, very entrepreneurial. They enjoy multitasking. They're very hyper aware, and they're not at all technology savvy. They're technology reliant. There's a huge difference. For example, one of our good friends, she has a son who is 18 years old. He already has his own lawn care business. He is highly successful. He has his crew that works for him. He's already branded himself. He already knows exactly what it is that he's doing with his company, and quite honestly, he's making pretty good money at it. When I was the principal at Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Dallas, I was really amazed at the number of my Generation Z students who did gigs on the weekend and were bringing in $3,000 to $5,000 a month on their own. They already had their own brand, their own label, their own YouTube channel, etc. So, you know, the Generation Z kids are really pretty amazing in terms of they're thinking about the future and planning for it. They're also our internet experts because they are always online. You know, I know as a high school principal, there would be certain websites or whatever that, you know, our district would block. Instead of calling tech services, we usually just found a student and they showed us how to get around those blocks because they were that savvy with the internet. They often too would rather message you than talk to you in person. I know as a high school principal, I gave all of my high school students my cell phone number, and people used to think I was crazy. But there were only two rules. They could not call me, they could only text me, and under absolutely no circumstances could they give my phone number to their parents. And in the 11 years that I was a high school principal, not one single student ever violated that. And quite honestly, they didn't abuse the privilege. You know, if they texted me, it was usually something, you know, pretty serious, or they just needed to let me know something that they didn't feel comfortable coming to my office to tell me. So, you know, really different mindset, but also very effective. Their heroes are YouTubers, and they're also determined to turn their hobbies into jobs. They are self-starters, but they're also oftentimes stressed out. So I think a lot of times we see that overscheduled, overstressed children and students in our school. They also prioritize quality over quantity of items or things. They're very selective in what they choose, and they are also very, very accepting. They've grown up in a world where things that used to be taboo 10 or 20 years ago are now very much part of the mainstream. So, you know, some of the things that come to mind are transgender individuals, or, you know, things that are, you know, like I said, used to be taboo or no longer considered that for our students. Probably one of their biggest challenges is because they're online so often and so much, they tend to write, if you're an English teacher, exactly the same way that they instant message or they text or whatever. So you really have to help them to understand the difference between proper or professional level writing, language, speaking, versus what it is they're used to doing in terms of text messages. The other thing to know about our students right now is that they are surfers and scanners. They do not like to do, nor will they usually do, in-depth reading. You know, I think back to my college days where, you know, I would read the chapter 3 times. You know, the first time read it to understand it, the second time to highlight it, the third time to read it again and go over my highlights. You know, my grandchildren and, you know, other students I work with in this age group think I was insane. They're like, why in the world would you ever do that? They do not read a chapter in a textbook. So we have to think differently about not only how we teach them, but what does that mean in terms of curriculum? Because, you know, if you're going to ask them to read a piece of literature, you're going to have to really make it exciting and interesting, because they're not going to sit down and read you know, the Republic on their own, or the Odyssey or the Iliad or any of those other kinds of very challenging and long texts. They also want constant and immediate feedback. So back in the olden days when I taught high school English and I had 160 students, you know, it would take me a while, just like it's taking me with you guys, to grade everybody's essays, because I read every single word and I would comment and do all of those kinds of things. That is extremely frustrating to our students. So I want you to start thinking about, what does that mean in terms of your curriculum development? They also like directness and not subtlety. These kids really have a hard time with inferencing skills. So, you know, you may see that in your classrooms. They are very technology, as I said, reliant, but they also crave personal contact. So, relationships with their teachers are really important. So when you think about developing curriculum for this age group, spend time developing it where relationships are there. And very, very, exciting, they also want to learn. So, with all that being said, how do you think understanding the generational differences between maybe faculty or administrators who are developing curriculum and what our students need? Why is that important for us to know? What are your thoughts?
I think in order for us to develop an effective curriculum, we need to know how the students learn best. It doesn't do any good to have a wonderful curriculum that's all this great information if our kids are not going to be able to grasp what we're teaching them. So we have to teach it the right way, and we have to cover material that they're going to be able to grasp and want to grasp.
Thanks, Sally. That is a great point. Far too often, we tend to develop curriculum and lessons and learning activities for what teachers want, and not based on where our kids are and what they need and how they're going to learn best. So curriculum, guys, is an ever-evolving process. You will never be done with curriculum development. I hate to burst your bubble. If you've ever written curriculum, it is a tedious process, and you can't wait to finish. But the minute you finish, it's probably already outdated. So know that it is a constant work in progress that requires continuous improvement and really changing with our kids. I read a statistic the other day that the amount of knowledge, so if you could somehow measure how much knowledge that the entire world had, that 50 to 100 years ago, that amount of knowledge only changed every 50 or so years. Okay, so, if you have, let's say, all the knowledge in the world is the number 10, it took 50 years before that number was 20. Then it would take another 50 years before that number was 30. In today's world, the amount of collective knowledge doubles every 3 months. So the idea that we can cover everything there is to know about any given subject is virtually impossible. And so while we still are tied to tests that expect our students to regurgitate discrete elements of information, in reality, what our kids need to be prepared for the future is we need to get them ready for careers we don't even know exist. I mean, think about it. If in 2005, would any of us know what an Uber driver was? No, we would have had no clue. But because we're getting our kids ready for jobs that don't exist, we have to teach them to be able to think critically, to be analytical, to be able to research, to delve deeply into issues and problems. In fact, most emerging curricula right now give students a problem and turns them loose. So here is your problem. You go out and you find all the information, you research, you analyze, you discuss, you debate, and then you create the solution. It is not a teacher-driven process. It is very much a student-driven process. Now, eventually, our assessments will catch up to that. Right now, we're not quite there yet. But for those schools that have been willing to take that on and to go more to this real-world problem-solving based curriculum, their students are actually soaring. So if we're still teaching those very discrete pieces of information, we're not doing the job. So I'm just saying, So somebody just said about Finland's new curriculum that it's a skills-based, focusing more on skills like thinking and learning. Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely, that's why Finland's #1 in the world with student achievement results, because they teach students how to problem solve and analyze. So instead of teaching them the steps to solve a math problem, they give them a math problem and tell them figure out how to solve it. Very different approach than what we do. We're very didactic in our teaching approaches and the way our curriculum is developed. And in reality, we're crippling our kids for the future. All right, guys, so the last few minutes we've got here, what are your questions, thoughts about anything we've talked about tonight or the course or anything in general? Oh, okay. Will wants to know, how did other people feel about the video about the school in Iowa? Yeah, I'm curious too. I'd love to know. What are y'all's thoughts?
I love it.
What makes you love it?
I mean, it's so outside the box, but it's the skills and the problem solving that we're talking about. I don't see how it works. That's okay. I don't, have to, but I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I said earlier I was principal at the Arts High School in Dallas, and this is kind of a rudimentary example, but I often, when I first went to the school, I was somewhat concerned because in our 7-hour school day, the students spent 4.5 hours in the arts. Okay, so that only left 2.5 hours in core content. And we were held to the same accountability standards as every other school in the state of Texas, including you had to pass the graduation exam to, graduate from high school. And what I learned and what those kids and teachers taught me pretty quickly was, because the kids were engaged in real world application of things that they loved and they were passionate about, everything else fell into place. So for example, I was watching one of my dance classes, and one of the students, they were working on some choreography and some particular dance moves. And one of the students made this great connection. They're like, oh my gosh, this particular dance step and sequence is very much like, and she named some math theory. Then another one said, oh, it's like this that we're learning in physics, and all of those kinds of things. So when we allow kids to be in a place and to learn things that they care about and they're passionate about, I'm telling you, it just works. We were honestly named one of the 8 best magnet schools in the country, and one of the highest achieving schools in the state of Texas on academics. We can talk later about how many presidential scholars in the arts and all that we got, how many downbeat awards, etc. But we were held to the same standards as the kids who were in solely academic programs. And we were doing as well, if not better, than those. Because again, kids were engaged in stuff that they cared passionately about. And also remember too, these were students that after school, they were spending 3 to 4 hours a night in rehearsals and productions and in the community and all that. They weren't at home studying. So I think that we're afraid a lot of times to do something different like the school in Iowa, because we only can imagine kids meeting state standards using a discrete set of skills, when in reality, as there's a million other ways for kids to learn. Okay, how do they meet the needs of, somebody asked, how do you meet the needs of SPED, ELL, ESL, Title I, et cetera? Honestly, I think it's probably easier in that type of an environment than it would be in a traditional classroom. I'm thinking back to the days that as a teacher, and I had every kind of kid in the classroom. So in a classroom of, let's say, 30 kids, I had 5 that were LD, I had 3 that were ELL, I had 2 that were this, and all these different labels, and it became very challenging to meet the needs of all of those kids because I was teaching a discrete set of skills. But then when I think back to my experience at the Arts High School, we had those same kind of kids, and you know what? It just all worked because we taught at a higher level, and those kids were able to figure out ways, with our help and support, of course. We had coaches and people in the classrooms, but it really, really made, it really raised the level of success for all kids. Okay, what other questions do you guys have before we close off? Any questions about assignments or kind of where we're headed? Let me just say one thing real quickly. I am trying to get everything graded as quickly as I can. But so like with reflective question responses, I grade, I'm not sure it's the right word, but holistically. So I go through and read everybody's responses, then I go back and put the grades in. So you'll see suddenly, like in an hour, everybody's grades will pop up. So I'm trying to get caught up. My goal is to have be up current with you guys here pretty soon. Okay, Lisa. Yes, ma'am.
I had a comment or a question about the group project, because I've sent an email to the people in my group and haven't heard back from anyone yet, and I don't know if any of those people are in the class tonight and can respond, because I'd like us to kind of divvy that up and figure out how we're going to do it.
Lisa, what group are you in?
Group I.
Okay. Is anybody else in group
I?
I'm not seeing anybody in group I. But if you want to, you may want to go into the instructional virtual office and post there and see if you can get any responses. And then if not, let me know, and you and I will just email me and we'll figure something out between us on how to get everybody involved. But kudos to group A. They've already done their assignment and turned it in and got a grade. Okay. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so with the project in the curriculum model that we're using, are we supposed to take a curriculum and plan a lesson and a quiz from that, or should we have a quiz and a lesson tied to, like, if we were teaching the curriculum plan to a teacher?
Quite honestly, you can do it either way. All I'm wanting you to get used to is the idea of starting with the standard and then breaking that into component pieces. So if you want to design the curriculum for teachers, that's fine. If you want to design it so that it's something that you would pick up and use directly as a teacher to deliver to students, that's fine as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else, guys, before I let you go? We will not have a Zoom meeting next week because of Memorial Day, and I know a lot of people are finishing up school and going on vacation and doing all kinds of fun stuff. So we'll pick up the week after. And just real quickly too, like I said, I've had a lot of you before, so you know kind of how I am. But please call me Tracy. Do not call me Fraley. That was a name I worked hard to get rid of. It's only LSU that still thinks I need that name attached to me. I am Tracy Johnson. Also, guys, do not split stuff with me. I mean, if you're late on an assignment, unless you just completely blow it off and never communicate with me, I'm not going to penalize you. Just let me know what's going on. Do not overthink the assignments, okay? This is not a question. This is not a class where I'm looking to get you. I want you to just become familiar with these concepts and ideas. If you ever get in the role of being a person, an assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum and instruction or whatever the title ends up being, trust me, you will figure all of the details out. This is just a course to get you comfortable with the ideas and concepts surrounding curriculum, the history of it, the various ways to develop and write it, and some of the research and theory behind it. Okay, so like I said, I'm not going to be looking for every little nitpicky thing in the world. Okay. All right, guys, anything else? Well, thank you. It was nice to put faces and names together and to see some of you that I've had before, and I appreciate everybody's patience with me. This was, like I said, not on my radar, but I'm excited to get to work with you guys in the class. So have a great night.